Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had damaging result. If you guys enjoy this movie, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Hikari 555 from 𝐬3. So let's start the video. The afternoon had started like any other. All the young children went out to play with their friends in the woods and along the river after school let out. Typically, everyone in the main preschool played hide and seek together. But lately the quirkless kids and the kids with quirks had been splitting apart until there was only one child with an unclaimed quirk, Izuku Midoriya. Everyone referred to him as Deku, but he loved it. One could tell with the way his green eyes would shine when he heard people say he couldn't do anything when he knew he could. Plus, it's not like he had anything to worry about. He still had friends like 𝐀𝐦 that played hide and seek with him, and that was good enough. Izuku smiled to himself behind his favorite tree, oblivious to his best friend sneaking up behind him. Katsuki Bakugo had just received his quirk a month ago, and found great joy in blowing things up. With a quirk such as his, it made sense to have people to test it on so he could become more adept at using it. And who would make a better target than the boy everyone knew was useless and coined his nickname for him, Deku. Katsuki had a mischievous look in his eyes, but it was covered by his arm. He was the seeker, and his target was always easy to find. Deku is behind his tree. He always makes loud steps. How can I scare him today? What if I used my quirk on him by surprise? I'm sure it will shock him, and then he'll see I'm going to be the one that's going to be a better hero than All Might. His chest puffed out in anticipation. Ready or not, here I come. Bakugo could clearly see his friend's shoes. He really wanted to scare and surprise the boy more than usual, so he silently climbed the tree until he was on the branch right above Izuku. He positioned himself perfectly with his hands forming the explosion, before skillfully jumping down, his hands the perfect distance apart to match Izuku's head. BOOM. +++ constant ringing and laughter was the last thing Izuku heard for the rest of his life. The incident had resulted in complete loss of hearing, and he had never seen his mother more devastated. He wasn't sure if she was sad that he lost his hearing, or relieved that he most likely would never be able to be a hero. He kept that burden of never knowing until the day he turned 14 and his life changed forever. Izuku had gotten used to the constant changing of schools. No matter where he went, he was constantly bullied, either for being quirkless or for being unable to hear. People would write profanity in his notebooks, make fun of his sign language, purposefully cover their mouths so he couldn't understand what they were saying, and even go as far as to place razor blades in some of his books if he wasn't paying attention. Luckily, his newest school mostly stuck to name-calling and some physical bullying that he could handle. Not like I can hear the names anyway and bruises disappear. Izuku sighed, but thought to himself, at least Bakugo makes sure people don't bully me too harshly here. Granted, it's because he bullies me the most out of all of them. He trudged himself up the stairs after another long day of school and immediately went to bed. His sleep was eventually interrupted by his mother shaking him to come grab dinner. She asked the usual questions. How was school? How are you? Do you need anything? Can I do anything? Should I call Bakugo's mother again? You're not getting bullied still, right? Do you want me to homeschool you? To which he always answered in sign language. Fine, okay, no, maybe, no. He loved his mother, but the last 10 years of having no hearing made it hard to communicate. Whenever he talked, things came out wrong, and it was too much of a hassle to sign long sentences. While he was signing, he sent his mother the largest grin he could muster to reassure her that he was okay, even though he wasn't, because that's what heroes do. They overcome everything. Izuku slept better than usual over his notes on quirks that night. The next morning, Izuku happily raced to school. He had noticed mutterings of a villain on people's lips, and he was hoping he would get to see it in action to take down notes on the villain's quirk and objectives along with the heroes he knew would come to save the day. I hope I get there in time. He crossed the walkway to see the villain towering over a bridge crossing. Wow, what a huge villain. He got there just in time as the villain swung his arm, knocking over towers and wires in his way. He quietly removed his notebook from his bag, and he happily drew the heroes he saw. Death Arms, Backdraft, 𝐀𝐦 Woods. He took note of their quirks and special moves, and remembered he already knew a lot about 𝐀𝐦's moves. Izuku looked up and noticed the stance he took in front of the monster villain. Here it comes. Preemptive binding lacquered chain prison. He smiled as branches started to expel from 𝐀𝐦, until a large lady dubbed Mount Lady came in and kicked the villain into the streets. Izuku was shocked by the sudden entrance of 20 or so cameramen taking photos as fanboys, while he finished sketching her for future analysis. Gigantification. Depending on its use, it could be an extremely strong quirk. The problem lies in the damage it could do to the city. If she could learn to control her size, she would be able to take down more enemies depending on the situation. It looks as though she will be rather popular. Izuku finished up what he could about her abilities before rubbing his chin. It seems like quirks are becoming stronger and stronger along with the crime rate. Therefore, heroes must become stronger with their quirks in order to defeat the villains that are also becoming stronger. Luckily, we have All Might. Izuku packed up his stuff and decided to head to a nearby park for the rest of the school day. He didn't feel like putting up with his class yelling about the assessments they turned in, and he didn't want to worry his mom by showing up at home earlier than normal. Especially since his future prospects assessment clearly stated he wanted to go to UA and enter in the hero course as a quirkless deaf person. Chuckling to himself at the reactions his answer might give, he proudly walked into a nearby store to grab some drinks before heading to his favorite park in the area. Plus, Izuku made his way through a tunnel towards the park when something began wrapping around his leg. What a perfect medium-sized invisibility cloak 𝐴𝐻𝐿. The presence wound its way up around his body until it was suffocating him and inserting itself into him via his throat. The slick fluid surrounded him, even as he bit down and tore at the fluid, trying to find anything or anyone that could save him. His vision started to blur and blacken, and Izuku imagined that death wasn't far. His body went limp with exhaustion, when suddenly air made its way back into his lungs after a blast of wind set him free. He shortly passed out, or he thought he had, when he opened his eyes and saw All Might standing over him. For some reason his cheeks were hurting, and having his idol in front of him so suddenly, he scrambled away, drawing his notebook out so he could speak to the man. "Oh good, you're awake. What's that, a notebook? Ah, you want my autograph, my boy? First let me apologize. Sorry about getting you caught up in my villain fighting. I don't usually make mistakes like this, but I was in high spirits on my day off in a new place. You were a big help. Thanks, I captured him safely." All Might gave out a boisterous laugh with a hand covering his forehead as he presented the liquid villain trapped in some cola bottles. Izuku gulped as he wrote down some things quickly. "I would love your autograph, but this is actually how I communicate. Plus, I noticed you already did. Thank you. It'll be an heirloom passed down from generation to generation. However, more than your autograph, I'm more concerned about your lying. Are you okay, All Might? Did something happen?" All Might gawked at the boy in front of him. No one had ever been able to tell when he was in his hero form. It disturbed him to a degree. He held up his hand in a goodbye manner. "I'm fine, my boy. Just have to get this villain to the police. See you again on the other side of the screen. Wait, I have so many questions." All Might started to stretch his legs in preparation for a long jump. Pros are always fighting enemies in time. I'm afraid I don't have the ladder to stick around, but I am counting on your continued support. Before he could jump, Izuku grabbed onto his arm and carefully tried to form the word wait with his lips. He flipped the pages of his book. "I may be quirkless and deaf, but I want to be a hero someday. I can tell something is wrong. I'm sorry for whatever you're going through, and I look up to your dauntless smiles. You are everything a hero should be. Thank you for saving my life. I hope one day you can support me as well. My name is Izuku Midoriya, and it was a pleasure to meet you." All Might ruffled the boy's hair a bit. "I can't say you can be a hero and be powerless, but your analytical skills are one of a kind. I hope I get to meet you again one day, boy. Until then." All Might took his jumping stance again with the villain secured in bottles in his pants pockets. Plus ultra. He took off and Izuku could only pray to one day see him again. Plus, while on his way home, Izuku felt the vibrations of what could have been an earthquake, or some other type of unnatural occurrence. However, an earthquake was not likely when smoke started to quickly encompass a building blocks away from him. He automatically ran towards it. A villain. I wonder which heroes they will send. I have to analyze more and more and more until I become stronger and smarter than anyone else. Strength is different for everyone, but I was meant to save people. Not as a police officer, but as a hero. He turned the corner to see a 𝐀𝐻 hang out of his middle school up in flames. Izuku squinted his eyes trying to understand the situation. The villain seemed to be in the center, and encasing someone, but he couldn't get a clear look. More importantly, the heroes had deemed the villain as such a threat that most of them were just trying to keep civilians away. Izuku bit his lip nervously, slyly running through the crowd to get a better look. Upon closer inspection, the monster was all too familiar. It was the wispy sewage villain from before that All Might had captured. Izuku's eyes went wide with fear. Did All Might let it escape somehow? Was there a leak in the bottles? He clearly had them when he jumped. Did someone release it somehow? He could see the faces of the civilians around him and read the troubled whispers that left their lips. A junior high schooler was caught up in this. These explosions. It couldn't be 𝐀𝐦. At his realization, Izuku immediately ran into the fray to save the only person that had ever tried to be his friend. It doesn't matter if you're a bully now. It doesn't matter if you will never accept me. No one deserves to die like this. He mentally went over the notes he had on heroes, and while running used his book bag as a distraction to allow Bakugo a moment to breathe. Deku tried clawing through the sludge in a little time before the villain recovered. "Deku, why are you here?" The only response Izuku could give was a strained smile to look like his hero. "I don't even know. Everyone always tells me to give up, you more than anyone else, but you also haven't gone as far to hate me for my inability to hear. You're the only one that only dislikes the fact I'm quirkless. Maybe it's because you feel guilty for what you did when we were 4. Maybe it's because I feel guilty for wanting the one thing I shouldn't have. But I can't just sit there and watch you die while you look like you're asking for help." Izuku continued to claw at the villain despite Bakugo's constant yells, or what he assumed were yells, to stop, along with the heroes behind him claiming he was suicidal, based off their lip movements, which wasn't far off since he went through a time where he was. He ignored everyone after that and kept trying to save 𝐀𝐻, focusing his efforts and eyes on that, rather than trying to understand what everyone was saying based off their body language and lip movements. His continued resilience had an effect on the person that mattered most in the crowd. When All Might saw Izuku smile, he transformed despite the pain because he was reminded that no matter what might happen to his body, heroes save people. Izuku closed his eyes when he felt the sewage villain moving in for another attack to consume him once and for all. But the sick fluid never made it to him. He opened his eyes tentatively and saw why he wasn't dead yet. All Might stood in the way of the previous attack. The hero's right arm was stuck in the villain, and some tendrils were stuck to All Might's face as well. Izuku immediately leapt into action, trying to get the sludge off of his favorite hero's face. All Might held him back with his free hand, as if reassuring the boy he had everything handled. The hero pulled back his right fist, breaking the bonds of the villain as blood poured out of his mouth. Because of the angle, Izuku couldn't make out everything he was saying, but there was one thing that caught his eye that his idol said. Pros are always risking their lives. All Might grabbed Izuku with his left hand and tightened his right hand into a fist as he reared it back as far as he could. 𝐷ETROITSMASH. The air swirled around Izuku in what could only be described as mini tornado. It was so strong, the sludge villain practically vanished. Shortly after, he felt another body hit him suddenly, and wasn't surprised to see that All Might had managed to catch 𝐀𝐻 after the monster let him go, and before the wind tunnel blew him away. The wind eventually died down to show that All Might was physically steaming after the attack, and rain began to pour down after the sudden air pressure passed. Izuku looked around, trying to find his stuff in the chaos that ensued. Luckily for Katsuki, he had fainted from the strain of the continuous suffocation by the sewage quirk, unlike Izuku, who was getting lectured by everyone about how rash he was. Before he could have a swift talking to for too long though, his hero came and placed him over his shoulder, jumping away from the reporters and the scene of the crime before too many questions were asked. The deaf boy had the largest smile on his face from looking at the city from above. He tapped All Might's other shoulder and pointed to his house. The man nodded and descended into the street, placing Izuku back on his feet. He took out his notebook and wrote up his usual analysis of the villain he had encountered, including possibilities for how he escaped the cola bottles All Might had kept him in. Suddenly, the area was surrounded in steam, causing Izuku to look up from his notebook. At first he had assumed that All Might had likely left, and the steam was actually just armed dirt. However, he could tell with his other senses that the steam was indeed more water-based than dirt-based. He squinted through the steam, holding up his notebook with one simple question. All Might. Eventually the steam dissipated, and in its place was a hollow-looking man. His rib cage protruding and blonde hair that framed his pale face in an unnatural way. There was one thing that was recognizable. The man had eyes with a black sclere and blue irises. Izuku had only seen them on one person, or more specifically, a certain hero. He wrote underneath his original question. Were you injured? I know you haven't really been on the scene that much these last 5 years. Was it toxic chainsaw? The man coughed lightly, some blood spilling out. But Izuku's worry was trampled by the man's slight smile. You really are a fanboy, young man? It was a fight not made to the public. I lost my stomach and half of my respiratory organs. Their loss has led me to only have the ability to stay a hero for 3 hours. That's all my body can handle before I have to retreat to this form. Izuku gulped and nodded. All Might wiped the final traces of blood from his mouth. I brought you here from reporters to thank you. If you had not done what you had, I would have pathetically stood to the side. Out of the two of us here, you're the real hero, and it was thanks to you I was able to act and save that boy. Izuku felt tears run down the side of his face onto his notebook, while he took in the words being formed by his hero. Top heroes all agree that the moment they knew what they were, their bodies moved before they even thought to save someone. It was the same for you, wasn't it? Izuku caved in on himself while he nodded. All Might touched his shoulder in a soothing manner, somewhat noticing that the young man was more built than he gave him credit for before writing down a message to remind the boy of his deeds for the rest of his life. It doesn't matter if you're deaf or quirkless. You saved someone today by your actions. So you see, you're already a hero, young Midoriya. Plus, eventually Izuku calmed down enough to notice that All Might was still there. The man communicated his story to the boy, relying on Izuku to understand his lip movements. All Might explained the fact that his real name was Toshinori Yagi, and how his quirk One for All could be passed down to another like a sacred torch. One person cultivating the power and passing it on to another that goes about cultivating it, and eventually passing it on as well until it reaches a new high every time. Izuku tentatively wrote in his notebook after the man told his story. Why me? I'm quirkless. I can't hear. I'm useless to the point that everyone calls me Deku. But is it okay for me to want it? Is it okay for me to have that power? All Might ruffled the boy's hair and nodded before writing an answer underneath the boy's questions in the largest kanji he could muster. The only requirement is a courageous heart. And you have one of the biggest ones I have ever seen. Izuku clutched the pages and determinately wrote back to his hero. I'll do it. When do I start? All Might started laughing. First, let's get you physically checked out, and we'll start a plan from there. We have 10 months to work with to get you into UA. Let's make them count. Plus the next day, Toshinori Yagi showed up at Izuku's doorstep to lead the boy to UA for a physical with Recovery Girl. Although it would have been easier to go to a normal doctor down the block, All Might was adamant towards Izuku that he trusted no one but Recovery Girl, and she was perfect for the job. Plus, All Might had already informed her of Izuku's situation. When they arrived, the woman began to pick and probe at the muscles around his body, trying to see how much muscle mass they had. Overall, she was referencing All Might's original form when he entered UA as a ground base for where he wanted Izuku, and was pleased to find that overall, Izuku was around the same muscle mass. She noted that he seemed to be particularly muscular in his thighs and upper arms and shoulders. She casually tapped his thighs a few times. Are ya into running and doing some push-ups? Izuku nodded and used a notebook he had in arm's reach. Started when I got serious about UA. I pushed myself to where I can do 40 push-ups upside down and against a wall, and I can run 10 miles no problem. All Might was astonished, and quickly started to write down an appropriate program that would build up his core muscles and further strengthens his arms and legs. He quickly analyzed what he wrote before handing the training regime over to Recovery Girl. She nodded a couple of times and changed some things to make them more manageable for the boy, and also adding in some high-calorie meals to give him something to build off of. They handed it to Izuku and looked for his reactions to the plan. He seemed satisfied overall. The plan was for Izuku to build up his core muscles before he received One for All. The process would take about 3 months, giving him 7 months to get used to his quirk and account for any problems caused by his inability to hear. He gave a slight nod and thumbs up. I can do this. Plus, after Midoriya got home, he went up to his room to organize another training regiment of his own that coincided with the one All Might had made. He really only added a couple of stray exercises here or there. But he was brought out of his focus by the vibrations of something happening downstairs. Whatever it was huge. He carefully, and what he hoped was quietly, made his way down the stairs to see the front door blasted open with an angry 𝐀𝐦 on the other side. 𝐀𝐦? He signed at him, hoping the other boy at least remembered the movement for his name. The blonde-haired boy pushed him against the wall with little to no reservations, yelling Izuku's nickname and profanity along the way. I have been looking everywhere for you to tell you I never asked for your help yesterday. And you didn't help. Got it? You're just a quirkless and deaf failure playing without a full deck. Don't think you can look down on me. Izuku gave him an okay sign to placate him, making the other boy drop him with clear distaste on his face. Stop looking down on me. Katsuki reeled his arm back down to punch the other boy, until he noticed that he was signing something at him. Even though it had been a couple of years, Izuku knew that 𝐀𝐦's mom had forced the boy to learn sign language after the incident when they were 4. Although Izuku had forgiven him for what had happened, he had never forgotten how he ended up the way he was, and he doubted he ever would. Then stop looking down on me, because one day, I will be the #1 hero. I'll see you at UA 𝐀𝐦. The abrasive blonde boy turned on his heel, signing, "Dumb nerd," as he went. He tried to make himself seem even tougher by sticking his legs out at awkward angles and putting his hands in his pockets. Izuku had to keep from laughing until after the boy was out of earshot, but his face showed all of his mirth. What a tough act. ++𝐀𝐦 Midoriya was used to seeing her son come worn out from runs or from fights in school, but the past 2 months he had a fire in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. He looked so excited and happy. I know he can do anything he sets his mind to, because he's my sweet boy. She smiled happily as she made dinner. She was making a pork cutlet bowl with a side salad and extra rice per the recipe that Izuku had given her a few months ago. Normally, after a bad day at school, 𝐀𝐦 would have to wake Izuku up by shaking him when dinner was ready. Though, starting a month ago, he would get up as soon as dinner was done, almost as if he could smell when it was ready. She happily placed some milk and water down for him to drink and went through her normal questions of the day in sign language. How was school? How are you? Do you need anything? Can I do anything? Should I call Bakugo's mother again? You're not getting bullied still, right? Do you want me to homeschool you? For once, her son didn't seem to mind to answer in complete sentences. School was fine. I'm doing great. More food, please. Nothing I can think of. No, please don't. I'm not. But I'm only at school for test days. I'm okay, thank you, Mom. 𝐀𝐦 blinked at her son. Only on test days? He broke out in a cold sweat. Everyone knew that making his mother mad was one of the biggest mistakes you could make. He rubbed the area behind the back of his neck with a smile. I started to get bored and wanted to focus on the more physical aspect for UA. I think I'm fine in the other areas. 𝐀𝐦 signed and signed back. If this is what you want, I won't stop you. Please be careful. If you could go to classes again, I would like that. However, I know how stressful school is for you because of this, and I know that people aren't as accepting or understanding as they should be. You're my baby boy, and I only want what is best for you. Izuku let his mom wrap her arms around him and cried into her shoulder. He had the best mother in the world, and no one could convince him differently. Because even when he was a kid and his mom didn't support his being a quirkless disabled hero, she still loved him. And she still loves me. Plus on nights, after spending most of the morning and afternoon with Izuku training, Toshinori Yagi focused his time on learning one thing that was important to him: sign language. Even though the boy didn't use it that often around him, All Might wasn't dumb to see that it was easier for his successor to use than constantly writing with pen and paper. Especially since there was the possibility of Izuku missing words from sentences while he wrote replies. Granted, it takes time to learn, but the benefits far outweigh the cons. For example, it's not likely a villain would know sign language off the bat. Common commands, phrases, or sentences could be managed in one sign in a combat situation, and would allow for complete anonymity to whatever emergency plans may have to be carried out in a bad scenario. He went over the few that he had come up with while learning normal sign language to show the boy and any of his friends that cared to learn. He continued, trying to move his hands in the awkward motions to try and expand his signing skills. Eventually, he hit his quota of 50 new signs, and closed his eyes as sleep overtook him at his desk. Izuku's 3 months passed by in a blur. He had been tasked with adding abdominal training to his own workout routine. And All Might had also requested he clean a beach's coastline, since a common hero before quirks came about was just a volunteer doing community service. Thanks to the amount of time he had been increasing his athleticism, most of the objects were rather easy to move into a garbage truck. But there were still some that gave him trouble. Eventually, he got to the day where he could remove everything but his least favorite stray object on the beach. An old rusty truck. Izuku had tried so many different ways of moving it, but nothing worked. It was like the thing wouldn't budge. When it finally clicked why this was happening. The truck is in park, isn't it? Way to go, Deku. You really took your time on this one. He leaned into the truck and put it in neutral before moving the last object off of the beach. It was almost surreal. Every day for the last 3 months, he had struggled to move some of the objects while trying to keep up a more rigorous running and weight training schedule. 5 am wake up, call, run, breakfast, class if there was a test or study if there wasn't, weight training, push-ups, lunch, study again and do homework, clean up beach, run, ab workout, weight training, dinner, bath, sleep. I knew I could do it, but I never thought I'd survive it. Izuku laid on the beach, breathing heavily, and took up the now setting sun, waiting for All Might to come back from a meeting at UA. Letting his body rest while he waited. Plus. When All Might arrived to see the coastline free of every piece of litter, even outside of where he had requested the young boy to clean, he was ecstatic. He had really chosen well, and Izuku Midoriya was going to begin his hero journey starting that day. All Might went over to the unconscious boy and started slapping him lightly, a lot like had done the day he met him, making the green-haired boy toss and turn in his sleep. His face twisted up like a baby chipmunk before he finally opened his eyes with a squint, signing with his hands before he even opened them completely. All Might. He felt himself being lifted into the air and set on his feet. It was like a breath of fresh air, but to say he wasn't terrified suddenly feeling weightless would be a lie. He liked to keep his feet on the ground so he could tell when movements happened around him. All Might felt like he was proficient enough to sign to Izuku after practicing the last 3 months. Are you ready to be a hero, young Midoriya? Izuku nodded with a smile on his face, while All Might continued after plucking on of his hairs off of his head. Eat this hair. Izuku blinked a couple of times. What? After some prompting, Izuku swallowed the blonde thread of wretched human protein down with a shudder. Even after a couple of moments, he was still shivering from the feel of it sliding down his throat, until the hair almost seemed to unleash and release itself, filling his body with energy. Izuku was glowing with the thought that now he really did have the power to do anything. He quickly swung his arm back, imitating his mentor, and punched into the beach. However, he was only met with pain. Izuku heaved as he held his limp arm to his side. It was taking every ounce of energy he had to stay awake. Izuku desperately tried to call out, "All Might," until he remembered that there was no use. He had been deaf since he was 4 and never fully learned how to say every hiragana or katakana pronunciation. It was why he had given up on speaking for so long. I may as well be mute, he thought as he fought to not pass out before the sand settled. Luckily, it didn't take long, and he was met with darkness right after seeing his teacher's face go from happiness for his accomplishments, concern over his state, and worry over his eyes closing as blood ran down the sides of his arm. Plus, when Izuku awoke, he was in the infirmary of UA. The white walls were blinding because too much light seemed to be coming in from the window. The sun seemed to have risen, though it was hard to tell when his eyes weren't adjusted. And that meant it was well after Izuku had eaten the hair and finished his mission on the beach. Closing his green's eyes repeatedly to become accustomed to the light, he couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if things had been different. Years ago, the same incident could have left me blind. He lightly skimmed his hands over his eyes. Lights from explosions in close proximity are known to do that. I could have lost an arm or other limb. I could have been scared to talk in fear that I was speaking as loud as an explosion, or I could have been fine. I could have been normal. Though, I still would have been quirkless. He smiled at startling revelation. It seems even I can overcome some things. Izuku was shot out of his musings by the sudden movement of the curtain around his bed. It was slightly ajar, and he could make out the shadows of Recovery Girl and Toshinori in what could only be conversation based off the hand and head movements. He silently moved towards the crack to see what they were talking about. Recovery was clearly upset about something and scolding All Might with a rather red face. He started to pay close attention to their lips. This power is too much for the boy. Even with 7 more months before the exam, there is no way he will be ready. Look at what has already happened to his arm. Anything else, and he could lose it permanently. All Might steeled a gaze at her, and looked her up and down. Will be careful. Have you forgotten what it was like for me? Recovery Girl sobered at the memory of a battered Toshinori in front of her on multiple occasions during his academic career in their prestigious school. She held out a finger at him and menacingly poked the man in front of her a couple of times. If he gets hurt, it will be your fault. You have to train him slowly. Percentage of power by percentage of power. He tried for 100 and he failed. Show him he has time to go slow or bad things will happen. The blonde-haired man chuckled lightly in an apologetic way as blood streamed out of his mouth. I will. It's a promise. Izuku was about to creep back to his bed when he saw his mentor flashing signs at him. I know you saw all of that. From now on, it's going to be training at low dosages with the power to prepare you for the entrance exam. Be prepared. Toshinori saw the shadow of a hand behind the curtain, making a thumbs up and sent one right back. It was going to be a long 7 months. Plus 𝐴 high school's hero course. A training school for those whose goal is to acquire the necessary qualifications needed for pro heroes. Among other courses across the world, theirs is the most popular and competitive with an acceptance rate less than 0.33% every year. The program is known for having some of the most famous heroes as 𝐴LM All Might, Endeavor, Best Jeanist, Recovery Girl, and the list could go on. Being a hero means I must pass this exam. Izuku Midoriya confidently stepped into his dream school with little to no nerves from being at the site of the exam in a place he admired. In the beginning, he used to be scared stepping inside, but he had been in the infirmary more times than he could count over the last 7 months. I don't have time to be scared. I have to tackle this exam and show how I've improved. Thanks to his mentor and his mentor's mentor, who happened to be the famous Gran Torino, Izuku could now use 5% of his one-for-all, full 𝐀𝐦. The technique increases his mobility and allows him to use his powers without too much restraint, although the damage his quirk could cause was significantly less than what All Might could achieve. His next goal was to get the power he could use up to 8% in the first 3 months of the academy. This seemed highly achievable because All Might was going to be teaching at UA that year, making it easy for them to meet up and work on the technique. Overall, Izuku was about 70% sure that he would pass the exam with flying colors. He took a step forward, and a familiar body shoved him to the side. Seriously, 𝐾𝐿. He was positive he was going to fall after his loss of balance, until he found himself physically hovering in the air. Izuku looked at the ground with a surprised and awed face. He was clearly being suspended in the air by a quirk, and it reminded him so much of his mom's. He quickly grabbed his notebook and wrote in it, before finding the aspiring hero that helped him on his left. He flashed her the notebook. Is this your quirk? It's wonderful. Is it gravity or just hovering? Have you thought about flying with it, or trying to do the opposite of this and crush people? The girl with a brown-haired bob that framed her face giggled lightly at all the questions. I'm Ochako Yoraka. Nice to meet you. My quirk is 0 gravity, so I can't do the opposite and crush people with the gravity. Or at least I've never tried. And yes, I can hover using my quirk on myself. He set his feet down and stared at her with stars in his eyes. Maybe you can look into trying to use your quirk to crush people with it. It sounds like that would be really cool, but I also like the way your quirk is now. Thank you for helping me. He smiled sweetly at the girl, which she returned with one just as bright. Let's do our best. I hope to see ya in my class at UA if we both make it. Izuku nodded and placed his notebook back in his bag before heading into the exam site after the girl. However, he froze mid-step at the realization he had just talked to a girl. I didn't talk. But he smiled victoriously and skipped into the building, believing with luck as great as his, he was definitely going to pass now. Plus, Izuku and his group were led to the battleground arena after a short explanation of how the exam would occur that year. Supposedly, there were to be robots attacking an assembled urban city, and the examinees were to fight them and gain points depending on their number. Everyone was allowed to bring anything they pleased, so a bunch of people had changed, including himself. He sported a teal workout outfit with his typical red shoes. He thought over everything he had noticed before they were led to the true exam site. The green-haired analyst had taken note of everything important. In the urban city scenario, there were 4 different types of robots. 1P, 2P, 3P, and 0P. Based off the images, 1P was clunky and slow, but had a good defense. 2P was slim and fast, and likely had less firepower. 3P had 2 heads, lots of firepower, and a high defense. The only thing throwing Izuku off was the 0P. If it were really 0 points, why have them in the first place? That's when it clicked. They probably aren't drawn to scale, so all of my analyzing could be for nothing. He rubbed at his head in frustration. Maybe 0P is huge or wider than how it was depicted. Rather than ruffling his feathers any further, Izuku turned his attention to the people surrounding him. He sharpened his green eyes on each of them, determining their quirks and basic personality traits. If you can't make lemonade from lemons, make it from limes. He happily noticed the brown-haired girl from before was assigned to the same battle center, and he smiled. It was always nice to see someone you know at an exam. So much so that he wouldn't have minded if his brash friend, not friend from middle school, had gotten in the same exam group as he was in. He walked over, intending to get another thank you and or hello across without his notebook, when someone grabbed his shoulder. The person pulled him around lightly to look at him with a stern expression on his face. He was well built, but he clearly worked his legs and arms out more than the rest of his body. Izuku noticed his legs had pipes in them, and concluded that the dark-haired boy must have some type of propelling quirk that was singular to his legs. Izuku was trying so hard not to get excited that he had missed some of what the boy had been saying, not knowing he was deaf, and had to look at his mouth to determine his words. He squinted at the other boy and managed to catch the last question of, "Are you taking the exam to interfere with everyone else?" The green-haired boy held his hands up and shook his head, and that seemed to be enough to get the other off his back. But the dark-haired boy seemed upset by the very presence of the deaf boy in his battle group, likely because of Izuku almost falling in front of the building. Before the other could continue to lecture Izuku, he noticed the gate to the exam opening and ran in before anyone else, shocking all the other examinee students that didn't enter until after they were told that they should have been running in like that kid as soon as the gate had opened. They stampeded through. Plus, when the other students started going through the streets, they were shocked to find that many robots had already been taken out, especially the 3P ones. Everyone assumed that some student other than the clumsy green-haired boy had managed to get ahead of them and destroy the harder ones. The person that had destroyed them left just enough for others to pass, and many were thankful for that consolation. Izuku took in the streets from the tops of the buildings he had been hopping with his full cowl. He had destroyed close to 16 robots. I have 48 points right now. I think that will be enough to pass, but I'll just focus on being number 1 in this battle group. He nodded his head at his thought process and calmly looked down at the streets, picking out people he knew. He was having the most fun looking at the stern boy that had grabbed him earlier. He was practically flying through the streets with his jet legs. It was amusing to watch. A lot of the students had clustered in a narrow main street, and that's when the rumbling started. It was shaking the building so much that Izuku jumped back a building to access what was happening when he saw a ginormous robot clutching onto the roofs of buildings a little ways from him. I should really stop making up predictions that could potentially harm me. If anything, so I don't feel like I brought it on myself. Wind and debris flew into Izuku's face, which he covered accordingly, when the monstrous giant robot moved its hands and destroyed the top of the building it had been clutching. Izuku could feel rocks slide by him and attempted to see past the dust that had surrounded him. He looked down to find that everyone was running from the robot, in a way like they were instructed to. Everyone was supposed to avoid it, but he couldn't find the brown-haired girl that had helped him. He scanned the streets some more to see that her legs were trapped under large rocks and debris. The monster robot was heading right towards someone that had been so kind to him, when others his age normally laughed and chastised him. Izuku's eyes glinted, and just like with the sewage monster, he moved without thinking. He jumped over from his building towards the monster's face and twisted his arm back. I have to use %100 because of how large this robot is. His arm became surrounded by red veins and glowed a magnificent yellow as he struck the green robot in the center of its face, making sure to take out its red eyes for good measure, and he clutched onto its body for the free ride. The faux villain fell backwards in what felt like slow motion, and when it was angled properly, he jumped off and back onto a building nearby, clutching his useless and broken right arm. The exam is over and everyone is safe. Izuku jumped down to join the others. Plus, Recovery Girl made her rounds to the Group B Battle Center and wasn't surprised to see that the one person severely injured was her favorite patient, Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya, I thought that we already said that if you keep using your full power, you will have scars on your body for the rest of your life. Why did you break the rules this time? 𝐬𝐻𝐻 signed at the older woman with his left hand. I had to. There was a big robot that would have hurt a girl that helped me earlier. The old woman sighed and kissed the young man on top of his head. You know more than anyone else that my powers only work on someone so much. If you keep getting hurt, there may be nothing I can do one day. What would your mother think? 𝐬𝐻𝐻 smiled with a hint of sadness before signing with both of his hands. There's always something you can do because you're amazing. Mom knows what I got into. 𝐬𝐻𝐻 left as soon as possible till the short lady scoffed and shook her head. She began looking for more patients and noticed the girl 𝐬𝐻𝐻 must have been talking about. Overall, the girl only had a fractured ankle, which was lucky considering how much rubble she was under. She simply pecked the girl on the cheek and went about her way healing students. There weren't many to go through, and she was finished within 10 minutes, so she got up to leave, when a boy actually stepped between her and the exit. Excuse me, recovery girl, is that short green-haired kid deaf? She looked up to see a young man with glasses, stern eyes, and dark hair. She replied with a coy smile. Now don't you think you should be asking him that? She exited the battle center swiftly since she had to go to the other groups and take care of the injured there as well. The spectacled boy was left to his own devices, as he considered the fact that the curly-haired boy had likely trumped everyone in the exam. It seems that this test wasn't just about academic and physical prowess after all, he thought to himself. Plus 1 week later, he got the results from 𝐀𝐦 in person. Surprising his mother, he had passed with flying colors at the top of his class in both the academic test and the battle center. In addition to his 48 villain points, he was awarded 60 more rescue points for doing the right thing and trying to save others. Overall, he passed the practical with 108 points, a number that surpassed 𝐀𝐻𝐻's own exam score. Although many other participants had been awarded the points, no one else had destroyed the robot completely like 𝐬𝐻𝐻 had. 𝐀𝐻 was extremely proud of his protege, though he made it clear that 𝐬𝐻𝐻 was not to use his %100 smash again unless circumstances were dire. Even though he had been confident, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 started to cry in front of his mentor in happiness. His mother watched on with a mixed look of joy for her son, and everything he would achieve at UA, and worry that he might be permanently hurt by a quirk again, or unable to reach the dreams he had always sought after. She wasn't sure if she would be able to take seeing her son crumble in front of her again. But for now, everything was looking bright, and 𝐬𝐻𝐻 had truly seemed happier than he had ever been over the 10 months. 𝐴𝐻𝐻 went to bed knowing that no matter what, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 would at least always be her #1 hero. It was 𝐬𝐻𝐻's first day, and things had been going really well. His mother made him happy by calling him cool both in sign language and through the light accumulation of proud tears in her eyes. The weather outside wasn't too hot since it was April. He also was pleased that he even knew exactly where his classroom 1 was, and he also had all the supplies he needed to get him through the day. Pens, spare notebooks, flashcards, highlighters, pencils, and an 𝐀𝐻𝐻 lunchbox to boot. Before walking in, he took in the huge door in front of him. It was almost as if it represented his life. He had struggled for so long just to make it through the door, and now he was finally considered elite of a specific group. Only the individuals with the best scores from the entrance exams, and the other 4 lucky recommended students that didn't have to take the exams, were placed in Class A. In total, 36 were admitted, but only 18 made it into Class 1A. He fixed his tie and opened the door with a big smile, wondering what his classmates were like, and hoping that they wouldn't be bullies like at his previous schools. That's when he felt the rumbling of a familiar quirk, making part of him want to close the door slowly and act like he was never there, and the other part want to be the bigger person and proudly go to his new seat. It seemed like the person with the explosion quirk was being his usual self, with some people surrounding him with angry glares. He compromised by just standing at the door with a smile and not walking in. Luckily, he wasn't alone for long since the saint from the entrance exams came up from behind him, rubbing his hair lightly and startling him. She started talking to him, but her lips were moving just a little too quickly for him to understand. Eventually, he managed to get that she was trying to say thank you for before. He shook his head and smiled with a light blush before taking out his notebook. No, I should be thanking you. You allowed me to do what a hero should always do, help others. I'm just happy you're safe. 𝐻𝐻𝐻 happily gave him a side hug and skipped around with him in tow to introduce him to everyone, starting with the boy in the glasses, who happened to be yelling at 𝐀𝐻𝐻. After realizing what was happening, 𝐬𝐻𝐻 ran away from his new friend over between the boy in glasses and the boy with blonde hair. He shook his head at the boy with his head hung low. I don't want people fighting on the first day. We should all be friends instead. He confidently looked up to break any fight up he had to find that the boy in glasses was bowing to him. He turned his head to the side in confusion, wondering what to do. He hadn't seen what the boy had said to him before bowing, and he didn't want the class to know he was deaf yet. So he stood there, hoping that it wouldn't seem weird or out of place. Luck seemed to be on his side as the male rose, seeming proud to have known and talked to him. Izuku didn't dwell on it and turned to his tentative friend, who hadn't made any other movements since he stepped between the two of them. 𝐀𝐦 seemed upset with me for matriculating to you, too, but he mostly just seemed shocked. I'm happy I decided not to go to school the day of the announcement. I'm sure that 𝐀𝐦 would have tried to hit me. When he noticed the glare on his friend's face, he backed away slowly toward the door, only to trip over a large object blocking the doorway. He looked up to find that there was a human face in the object, and opened his mouth in a silent, shocked scream. Some might have thought he was silently screaming out of fear, and although that is half the truth, it's not the full one. The man in the yellow grotesque object by the doorway was none other than Eraserhead, one of the top 10 heroes that graced 𝐀𝐦's walls. The man slowly brought out a protein-like drink to replenish his energy, as he moved like a caterpillar across the floor and into the classroom. Eventually, he stood up and stepped out of his sleeping bag, attempting to at least act like a teacher for his new students. The only kid that was quiet and alert in this whole classroom was 𝐀𝐦 here. The rest of you took 8 seconds from the time I arrived. Eraserhead kept the same nonchalant voice that he always had as he lectured the students a bit. Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough. Izuku was trying not to jump up or down as he screamed on the inside. Is Eraserhead going to be our homeroom teacher? This is so awesome. He excitedly paid attention to the man's next words. I'm your new homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Nice to meet you. Izuku's brain short-circuited as the man held up some uniforms, and he guessed that they were likely going out into the field for a bit. So he grabbed one and skipped towards the nearest changing room. Aizawa looked after the green-haired boy and pointed with his thumb in the direction he went. So I want you all to be like that. Hurry up and change and go down to the field for physical examinations. Meanwhile, despite his faith in his ward, All Might was becoming nervous at the thought of having Shota Aizawa as young Midoriya's homeroom teacher. Plus, quirk assessments. Midoriya took in the faces of his fellow classmates as he stood quietly in the back. Overall, there was a mixture of apprehension, surprise, and excitement around the board. He didn't like the thought of doing another test so soon after the exams either, but he knew he could probably pass. Unfortunately, since his new homeroom teacher was facing in the other direction, he was missing core aspects of the test. All he knew is that it was a physical fitness test where he could use his quirk, and that his teacher was clearly upset by the fact that kids around the globe were not allowed to use their quirks in their tests outside of hero academies. The teacher steeled a gaze at Midoriya. Midoriya, you were the one with the best practical exam results, right? In junior high, what was your best softball throw distance? Izuku broke out in a cold sweat. He hadn't been in his school for any physical fitness tests because he hated doing them as someone without a quirk. There was no reason to go through the pain of knowing everyone could do it better even without their quirks. Plus, he didn't have his notebook to answer anyway. He kicked at the ground and pouted to the side to indicate he wasn't happy with the number, even though he actually didn't know. Everyone's attention was towards someone else though. Apparently 𝐀𝐦 had decided to answer for him, and part of him was almost thankful for that. The boy was also using some sign language to explain what he was doing for Izuku to understand. Izuku was never present during our junior high fitness exams because he was excused. Mine was about 67 meters. Ah well, try to throw it now. You can do whatever you want so long as you stay in the area of this circle. He motioned to the ground that had a circle with a decent area for a couple steps before a throw. Bakugo reeled his arm back with the baseball and used his quirk at the last possible second, so it propelled the ball the furthest it could go. It didn't take a genius to see that it was going way further than 70 meters. Aizawa turned around with the distance of the ball 705 m. Know your maximum first. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. Everyone seemed shocked by the distance he threw, but Izuku was just trying not to laugh from 𝐀𝐦 actually yelling die during his throw. I guess that's how he would do his best. He needs something or someone to hit, or it doesn't work, he thought. Suddenly everyone got more excited about getting to use their quirks. But the homeroom teacher's attitude just darkened. It looks fun, huh? You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? His lips moved into a twisted grin. All right. Whoever comes in last place after all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential and will be punished with expulsion. Izuku saw some tense and others relaxed. The likelihood of someone getting last in all 8 tests was unlikely, and so he wasn't too worried about it. He wouldn't be last place. Aizawa wiped his hair out of his face and with a manic laugh addressed the students one last time before the tests began. The teachers are free to do what we want about the circumstances of their students. Welcome to 𝐴's hero course. Izuku felt 𝐲𝐻𝐿 tense next to him, and he looked at her worried expression. Last place will get expelled. But it's the first day of school. She shook her head back and forth at the situation. No, even if it wasn't the first day of school, this is too unfair. The tall teacher slowly addressed her. Natural disasters, big accidents, and selfish villains. Calamities whose time or place can't be predicted. Japan, no the world, is covered with unfairness. He clenched his jaw at her and narrowed his eyes. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at Ronald McDonald's Funhouse after school, too bad. For the next 3 years, 𝐴 will do all it can to make your life surrounded by constant hardships one after another. He looked up to the sky and raised a hand slowly to the sky, smiling. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Overcome it will all you've got. Izuku clenched his fist, trying to think of how to use full cowl to do well in the tests, and rubbed at his shoulders. He scowled because it was clearly going to be a long first day at school. Plus the tests were never-ending. 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side steps, ball throw, distance run, seated toe touch, and sit-ups. Overall, thanks to the %5 full cowl, Izuku had gotten first in the 50-meter dash, 6th in grip strength, 2nd in standing long jump, 2nd in repeated side steps, 2nd in the ball throw, 3rd in the distance run, 4th in seated toe touch, and 1st in sit-ups. That had him in 3rd compared to the whole class, and tied with, of course, Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku knew that he was going to come give him crap for having dared tie with him as a useless deaf Deku. And it didn't take long for his imagination to become reality. He felt someone grab his shirt in a tight grip, and Kaken's open mouth and angry face didn't leave much room for what he was yelling at him, along with the growing heat of his hands, to cause an explosion. Izuku grabbed his arm and glared at the boy before trying to sign with one hand. Someone told me I could become a hero, and with effort I can do anything. So I'll do anything to help people. You know that better than anyone. Bandages wrapped around the blonde boy, and the heat cooled in a matter of seconds. Izuku got stars in his eyes because he knew that Aizawa-sensei was causing the phenomenon, and he always loved seeing other quirks. Bakugo threw Izuku down and signed, "Shut the hell up, useless Deku," before tearing at the bandages and huffing while walking away. Izuku shook his head in wonder and headed back into the building after the results were announced verbatim from the board. Apparently no one was actually getting expelled, so it was a good day for 𝐴. Thinking some more on it, it was also a good day for Izuku because the next day was hero basic training. Plus Izuku happily walked out of the building after school, thinking about what All Might would do for basic training, when he felt someone tap his shoulder. He did a 360 in shock, and noticed he was actually being followed by 𝐻𝐻𝐿 and Tenya. Tenya seemed to be talking about how taken he was by Mr. Aizawa, and how great the man was for pulling off a lie in front of you, students. And 𝐻𝐻𝐿 was just standing quietly for the other boy to finish, before getting both of their attentions. Are you both heading to the station? Izuku nodded with a smile and Tenya invited her along. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 pointed at him with a wide grin after getting Tenya's name right. You're Deku Midoriya, right? Izuku shook his head before grabbing his notebook from his yellow backpack, so he could reply in a coherent way. My name is Izuku, but Kaken likes to call me Deku to make fun of me every once in a while. I hadn't been in classes with him since preschool until junior high, but I got called Deku more at my other schools, so I don't really mind anymore. 𝐻𝐻𝐿 grabbed his shoulder with her right hand to get his attention, and a working fist with her left. But doesn't Deku sound like the Japanese word for you can do it? I think that fits you perfectly, Midoriya-kun, and I like it. Izuku smiled and wrote down. Then you and Ada-kun can call me Deku. As a hero, I should turn any insult into a compliment, right? Tenya almost had tears in his eyes. You're a true hero, Midoriya-kun. But don't you think you're accepting it too easily? For the first time in a long while, Izuku laughed full-heartedly, catching the attention of his two new friends because it has been the only sound they had ever heard the boy make. He walked to the station with the two in tow and a large smile on his face. I can at least be happy that I have friends. The next day, after the grueling classes of Algebra Roman II, Japanese History, Japanese, Biology, and English I, Izuku was excited to finally transition into the afternoon class. Also known as All Might's class, Hero Basic Training. Every fiber of his being was on haywire, and he felt like he could explode. Well, in a non-𝐀𝐦 way. He laughed at his own joke on the inside. When All Might burst through the door, and Izuku saw how excited everyone was, he felt at ease that he wasn't the only one ready to burst from their seat. So far, the cat was not out of the bag that he was deaf, or that he was All Might's successor, and he couldn't have been happier because he finally had real friends for the first time in forever. Even though 𝐀𝐦 isn't so bad, we haven't really gotten along in a while. The fact I got in must have been the tipping point for him. At least he hasn't told me to go kill myself like so many others did. Izuku stopped in his tracks and shook his head. Sometimes the past is better left alone and untouched, and he knew better than to think of the past. It only brought up bad memories. He slapped his hands against his face and grinned, instead focusing on All Might's lips. Apparently today will be a combat lesson. Wait. They actually made a costume based off our requests. I thought it was a hoax. Izuku's eyes had large stars in them, and he almost bounded over to the numbered containers, knowing one of them had his dream supersuit inside, but tried to act reserved, and only failing because he was still the first one to them. Plus, 3 weeks ago Izuku sighed over a plethora of paperwork. Even though All Might and I got my quirk registration a while ago, I still need to finish creating my costume design for the clothing allowance. He drummed his fingers over his favorite notebook and drew a basic human first. I wanted to be cool like All Might. Eventually Izuku found himself drawing a costume with a green full-body jumpsuit, a red belt, elbow pads, knee pads, and gloves, a large pocket for a notebook to write in, if the situation called for it, and red boots. He also paid special attention to the face, adding a mask with long ear-like protrusions that resembled All Might's haircut, and a respirator with a smile on it. Izuku smiled at his creation, and happily clung it to his body. I'm going to have the best suit in the world, just like All Might. At that moment, his mother walked up behind him and saw the design, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder and nodding. In her eyes, it seemed like the best form of encouragement her son needed. She wasn't the same mother who would give up on her son's dream because she was worried over him. She would support him from that moment on with every fiber of her being until the world ended. Plus, after seeing everyone in the sunlight, Izuku was able to be awed by the design efforts of the team that created the class's costume. From Bakugo's costume, which allowed him to have an even more intimidating aura than before, and resembling a grenade ready to blow up, to Minato's costume that simply blended his hairs. Every detail of every suit was perfectly planned out and executed for every costume to provide the best opportunities for the hero that wore them. He stood proudly next to his friends, seeing Ochako shift her eyes left to right in embarrassment. Part of him understood why. If his mom hadn't made his jumpsuit for him and sent it to the workers to check over, he was sure that he would be in the same situation. They had placed Ochako in a skin-tight spandex suit. Izuku felt his face getting a little hot, and mimicked Ochako's embarrassed neck rub. All Might zeroed in on his young student's costume and almost burst out laughing. It was clear who young Midori had tried to imitate for his design, and a part of him was almost proud that the boy was so obvious about his endearment. The most famous #1 hero calmed his very well-hidden mirth to address his students. Now, it's time for combat training. Izuku's eyes were pulled away from the man when he felt something lightly hit his suit. He analyzed where the feeling came from to see his new friend 𝐀𝐦 asking some sort of question. But he had no idea what was being said because of the boy's mask. All Might held up 2 fingers to the students. No, we're going to move ahead 2 steps. Most of the time, fighting villains takes place outside. But if you look at the total numbers, atrocious villains appear indoors at a higher rate. Imprisonment, house arrest, backroom deals in this society filled with heroes. Intelligent villains hide in the shadows. He moved his 2 fingers down as if making groups. For this class, you'll be split into villains and heroes and fight 2-on-2 indoor battles. This is a real battle to understand the basics. The key this time is that there's no robot you can just beat up. Izuku had trained for a long time to not feel overwhelmed when trying to process too much information, even before he met All Might. But he was having a hard time at the moment as his class asked questions about the combat training. His eyes could only move so fast. Some individuals had masks on that hid their lips. He could only guess what they were saying or asking. Izuku couldn't thank his mentor enough, because it was almost like the man had a panic reader. He happily addressed his students, silencing them. "I will answer all your questions." The large man took out a small book that resembled some kind of script to Izuku. All Might read from the pages. The situation is that the villains have hidden a nuclear weapon somewhere in their hideout. The heroes are trying to dispose of that. The heroes need to catch the villains or get the nuclear weapon back in the allotted time. The excited head hero pulled out a box that had lots written on it. Teams and opponents will be determined by drawing lots. The teams ended up looking rather interesting to All Might. Team Anizuku Midoriya and Tenya Ida Team B Shoto Todoroki, and Mizo Shoji Team C Minoru Mainta, and Momo Yaoyorozu Team D Katsuki Bakugo and 𝐓𝐸𝐸 Tokoyami Team E Mina Ashido and Yuga Aoyama Team F Koji Koda and Rikido Sato. Team G Denki Kaminari and Kyoka Gyro Team H Tsuyu Asui and Ochako Uraraka Team Itoru Hagakure and Mashirawa Jiro Team J Ijiro Kirishima and Hantasiro. All Might quickly drew the teams that would be heroes and villains from large boxes with their respective names. The balls showed Team A as the villain group and Team D as the hero group, meaning Izuku would be facing 𝐾𝐭 in the first fight, as a villain. Izuku suddenly found it hard to breathe, and some part of him hoped that if he passed out at that moment, he wouldn't have to fight. Based off 𝐾𝐭's expression though, there would be a fight whether he was conscious or not. Izuku could only sigh and make his way towards the fake building. Plus Izuku and Tenya were allowed into the building first since they were playing out the part of the villains and had to decide on security measures for the nuclear weapon they were protecting from the heroes. Izuku quickly took out his notebook, writing an excuse along the lines of, "I will use this to communicate since it's hard to hear you through your mask." When in reality, it was impossible for Izuku to converse with the boy at all since he was deaf and his face was covered. "If it's okay with you, I want to try coming up with our evil plan. I know 𝐾𝐭's quirk well, and I know what makes him get angry and go overboard." Tenya gave a light nod of approval for Izuku to continue on with planning. "I believe with your quirk, you would be best suited for watching the nuclear weapon. They can't get it if it's too fast to catch right. If memory serves me right, 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺's quirk is some type of shadow, which means both 𝐾𝐭 and 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺 can't fight near each other. The explosions would weaken 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺's abilities, though I have a feeling 𝐾𝐭 won't pay attention to that." Izuku meticulously thought out each scenario and quickly decided on one plan that he shortened to suit both himself and Tenya. "It really would be best for you to guard the nuclear weapon, preferably on the second floor facing the sun to weaken 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺 if he comes after you. I will fight 𝐾𝐭 and keep him busy. If both of them come after me, even better because that means we still pass." Izuku happily tapped Tenya's armor and smiled with an okay sign and held Tilt to the side, asking if the plan was okay overall. Tenya nodded enthusiastically. "All in all, the best teams have the best plans. In theory." Plus, meanwhile, 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺 was dreading working with Katsuki Bakugo. Even he could see that the boy had an unrelenting obsession with Izuku, and he wasn't the nicest to the young boy. In the end, he wanted to win the combat lesson, and in order to do that he knew he had to at least talk with the abrasive boy. He tapped the blonde's shoulder. "What do you want, Raven Breath? Just stay out of my way and let me handle Izuku. Okay? If you get in my way, I will hurt you." 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺 had to keep from laughing. Even though he wasn't sure how Dark Shadow would hold up to Katsuki's explosions, he doubted the other could actually manage to hurt him. He sighed and ran his human hand around his beak. "Do you know of any weaknesses that we can take advantage of for either of them? Izuku was the #1 test taker and has gotten the best grades thus far." Katsuki gritted his teeth and set blazing eyes on 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺. "Which shouldn't have been possible. I should have been first." The blonde scowled to the side and tapped a finger on his elbow impatiently. It was clear that he just wanted to obliterate the green-haired boy for simply being better than he was in the entrance exam. That's when 𝐓𝐸𝐸𝐺 noticed a moment of clarity pass through the other boy's eyes. "You know, Raven, I just thought of something that might scare the hell out of Izuku, but you'll have to do it because it wouldn't be possible for me." Plus, Izuku laid low behind one of the building's pillars waiting for one of the heroes to pass by. His objective was to hold them off for as long as possible until a time limit was called and set. After all, the combat course couldn't go past its allotted time slot. He tried to feel for any vibrations that signaled 𝐀𝐦 coming his way with explosions, or even the distinct light drum of steps. But so far he couldn't detect anything of the like. So they're either playing on the safe side, or they haven't come in yet. Deep down, 𝐬𝐸 knew that 𝐀𝐦 would eventually come for him, since he had been so upset the day before, and looked like he relished any fight they might partake in. The childish behavior of his first friend made him shake his head. It was like 1 minute 𝐀𝐦 would be feeling guilty over 𝐬𝐸's loss of hearing, and the next 𝐀𝐦 was blaming all his problems on him. 𝐬𝐸 activated his full cowl to quickly scan the bottom floor of the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of one of the heroes, but everything was turning up empty. He assumed that it meant that he had more time to set up for the situation than he thought. At least that's what he thought before 𝐀𝐦 popped up beside him and set off an explosion. 𝐬𝐸 felt the rumbles subside and managed to block the blast. But when he opened his eyes, his vision was black. The effect was immediate. His body started to tense up, a cold feeling snaking around him and a horrible shiver shaking his whole body. Every breath he took shortened until they could barely be called a gasp. He couldn't breathe, and his body crumpled forward into a hunched fetal position. He tried clawing at his body, his arms, anything to make sure he was still alive, to even feel like he was still on Earth. But he couldn't feel anything. Eventually his head rolled, eyes glazed, waiting for anyone or anything to break the feelings that had overtaken him. There was no one there. He knew it. Who would ever be there for a useless person? A Deku. Sure, he had come far, but some things never change. Now he wasn't only deaf, he was blind too. Every gasp felt like the last, and all he could do was cry. Even though he had gotten panic attacks before, none of them ever felt as long or severe. He just assumed they were natural levels of anxiety and panic for when one was deaf. It felt like days had passed in the torment, every sense of time lost. 𝐬𝐸 finally felt someone embracing him, and looked into the shadows to see a boy his age with red eyes and jet black hair respectfully asking for 𝐬𝐸's forgiveness. The green-haired boy simply fell into the embrace and shakily closed his eyes, praying that no one had seen him and fearing the prospect of so many knowing some of his secrets. When 𝐬𝐸 woke up to the blurry white walls he had become all too familiar with over the summer, he wasn't surprised. Even though he couldn't remember much from the day, he knew that he had succumbed to a horrible darkness while he was still awake, and that had led him into an abnormally long panic attack. Makes sense that I would be in the clinic after whatever happened. He scowled and tried to move to sit up, only to wince when pain traveled up his arms. His arms were wrapped tightly in bandages, and he could still see the bloodstains on them. They traveled from the ends of his fingertips all the way up to his shoulder. On his torso, he had electrodes that connected to a heart monitor, and in his right arm, he had a tactically placed Roman 4 dripping some fluids into him. Guess that means I shouldn't touch my right arm. If I want to know what happened, I need to take off the bandage on my left. He carefully took the left bandage off in a rhythmic motion, only to reveal wounds that looked like a metal rake had attacked his arms. 𝐬𝐸 stared in wonder at them before realizing what could have caused the weird contusions. He slowly lifted his hand to see that it had blood beneath the fingernails. He started shaking slightly at his grotesque epiphany, and had to hold his unwrapped hand over his mouth to keep from getting sick. I did it to myself. Why did I do that? How long was I having a panic attack for? 𝐬𝐸's eyes were widened in absolute horror over what he had done. He drew his knees in and started trembling and crying. Will they kick me out? Does my class know now? Will I be able to still have friends? Will I have to change schools again? Every thought ran past him at 1,000,000 miles per second until his body started to break down. His heartbeat and breathing rate picked up, and the shaking just kept getting worse, until he felt the drop of medication through the Roman 4. Recovery girl had come in when a heart monitor to his right that he couldn't hear started to go off. She wrote down a quick note for the boy. I need you to breathe with me. Slowly, 𝐬𝐸. Recovery girl walked around the bed and placed his left hand near her chest, trying to guide his breathing. After a couple of minutes he had calmed down significantly. She nodded encouragingly and stepped out of the little room she had made for him in the clinic when he arrived. After a bit, he started to doze off in a tired haze. Plus a couple of hours beforehand plus. Saying recovery girl was annoyed would be an understatement. The first day of basic hero training was always her least favorite. Contusions, broken noses, quirk backlashes, quirk damages, broken bones, sprains, headaches, concussions, and anything else under the sun always happens on BHT day. She sighed and rubbed her temples lightly, squinting in the process, and proceeded to play with her bun while she waited for the first students to arrive. Recovery Girl had been working the clinic post for over 30 years, and she knew the exact time that each class would be starting, and based off a time interval, she could guess when injured people would start walking through her door. Ring, ring, ring. Which is why she was surprised when her phone rang first. Hello? Ah, Recovery Girl, this is All Might. We have a situation down in the basic training coliseum. Toshi-chan, what's wrong? Izuku is experiencing some awful injuries, and he needs help. I'm afraid I wouldn't be much help with him like this. What? Well, why are you calling me? Hurry and bring him up here so I can check over his injuries. It's not like it would be hard with your ridiculous muscles. I can't. He seems to be experiencing a panic attack on top of injuring himself and all the other injuries he sustained in battle. I don't know what to do. If there's one thing she could tell, it was that Toshinori was one step away from breaking down himself. He's having a what attack? I'll be down as fast as my old bones can carry me. Calm down. Try to get him out of it by holding him and just repeating everything will be fine. I'm worried I'll hurt him or do something wrong with how compromised I am right now. Then make a student do it. She slammed the phone down and grabbed her emergency medical bag with a huff. Plus, All Might crushed his phone on accident and tried to regain any composure he could. After what he saw on the video feed, Katsuki Bakugo, and he would be having serious words later, along with 𝗵𝐸𝐽. He breathed as deeply as he could before walking into the scene to find 𝗵𝐸𝐽 already cradling the boy. The shadow that was his quirk had abandoned his face, leaving him looking more human than bird. It had left him to help him hold Izuku's hands so he couldn't scratch himself, and also help him rock Izuku back and forth as he apologized over and over again for what he had done. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The dark-haired boy was frantic over the green-haired one whose arms were still bleeding out onto the ground. It was almost ironic how everyone in the room was technically crying. Midoriya was lost in himself as tears still fell from his glazed-over eyes. 𝗵𝐸𝐽 was trying his best to stay put together as he apologized to Izuku, tears slightly accumulating in his red eyes. All Might was crying out either in frustration or anguish over what had happened, and Katsuki was staring shocked at the scene with tears in the corners of his eyes. All Might closed his eyes and crossed his arms as they waited for Recovery Girl to arrive. It seems young Katsuki wasn't expecting this to happen either. Maybe there is hope for him yet. Plus, when Recovery Girl saw the scene in front of her, she knew she had to do something fast. She quickly kissed Izuku on the side of the head, hoping it would help cure the more emotional ailments. She knew after his multiple summer excursions her power had started to dwindle in effect on the boy, but she had no doubt it could at least ease the effects of the panic. Recovery Girl motioned for 𝗵𝐸𝐽 to pick the boy up after Izuku had settled into an unconscious state. I need to get him back to the clinic right now. Are you okay to move him? The boy nodded and picked Izuku up onto his back in a piggyback ride style, so that Izuku's arms wouldn't get injured anymore by rubbing against his clothing. He gave his blonde ex-partner a parting glare and quickly took Izuku to the clinic behind Recovery Girl. All Might called after him before he was out of earshot. Meet me in front of the clinic after school. The man looked over to Katsuki. You too, young man. Plus present time plus All Might gruffly looked at the two young men in front of him, trying not to punch a specific blonde one in the face, as the homeroom teacher Aizawa came into view. The lazy man sauntered next to the number one hero before groaning. Whose idea was it and why? Depending on your answers, there might be consequences. All Might nodded beside him and held up a hand. Not just in the homeroom, but also in the basic training as well. Both boys seemed to keep their cool, but 𝗵𝐸𝐽 spoke first. Katsuki's. I wanted to incapacitate Izuku. He looked down in shame as his shadow wrapped around him in comfort. For some reason, it hadn't returned to his face yet, but he wasn't complaining as it wrapped around his hands as though it were gloves. Mine. I wanted to win. Katsuki looked to the side with fire in his eyes. All Might stealed a harsh glance at the blonde. And why is that, young one? Because I deserve to win. The boy gritted his teeth and tried to keep his explosions from getting swept up in his emotions. Aizawa nonchalantly fiddled with his scarf. Why do you think that? Because he's just a worthless, deaf Deku. 𝗵𝐸𝐽 looked shocked at the revelation that Izuku was deaf and the settling in of what he had done almost made him bowl over. Katsuki continued with his rant. After everything I've done to him, I wanted to win just once. He smashed his teeth like a horse. Who had the best grades? Deku. Who was more put together? Deku. Who did mom want for her kid instead of me? Deku. Who didn't give up on me after what I did to him? Deku. He wrenched a hand over his face. I just wanted to beat that self-sacrificing idiot. Maybe make him hate me for once after what I did. Okay? Because he never did. And before I knew it, he was gone until the last few years of junior high. I was so used to being the best. Until he came from behind and took it all. All Might held onto the boy's shoulders, crunching them slightly and making him wince. Katsuki, I believe you are a genuinely nice person. I just think that you put things ahead of others based on what you've been through. He looked him dead in the eyes as he crouched down, especially when it comes to young Midoriya. I see greatness in you, if you could only control your temper. The boy hung his head lower as he began to wipe tears out of his eyes. All Might was sounding too familiar to his own mother. I don't need to control anything. He deserved it. Everyone's eyes widened in shock when Recovery Girl came out from the clinic and slapped Katsuki across the face. No one deserves what you did to him. It seems that the green monster reared its head at you, and I will never understand how that boy in there will ever forgive you. Your payment for what you did, in my case, is that you must teach the whole class sign language without giving them a reason why. You are not to speak about his condition. If I found out you have, there will be more work waiting for you in the clinic. She huffed in annoyance as she walked peacefully into the clinic, while Katsuki held his swollen red cheek. It's not like I know that much sign language. Only what they taught in the center when I was a little kid for what happened. All Might gripped his shoulder and whispered in his ear. Then that is what you will teach. Let it serve a lesson that sometimes you need to put things behind you, both for yourself and others. I don't know if you can tell, but you have deeply affected 𝐓𝐬𝐬𝐿 too. He doesn't even want his shadow near his face again, because of what he's worried it could do. 𝐓𝐬𝐬𝐿 was staring at the clinic door with a dead gaze. His shadow still encompassed his hands, and every time he reached for the door, he stopped dead in his tracks. He looked like someone who had lost the will to go on from his one mistake. Aizawa went over and opened the door for the boy, so that they wouldn't have to continue watching him struggle to do so himself. The black-haired boy flashed a peevish smile and hurriedly went inside to see if Izuku was awake to speak with him. Aizawa closed the door brutally to face his blonde-haired student. Your punishment from me is that you have to call both your mom and Izuku's and explain what happened in full excruciating detail. And if your lessons for sign language are rusty, you are to go back to the center and take them all over again. All Might chirped in. Mine is that you must fix Izuku's hero costume by hand until he's satisfied with the results and help him carry his supplies while he heals on top of an apology to the boy. Katsuki wrenched his shoulder out from All Might's grip. Fine, whatever, I don't care. He walked away, having a fit with a phone in his hand to call his mother and Miss Inko. Plus Izuku awoke to the same walls as before, when he felt the door rattle excessively. He figured maybe Recovery Girl was back and wanted to check on him when he saw the curtain around his bed move, but was surprised to find that the person entering was someone else. He had black spiky hair and piercing deep red eyes, a sharp nose, and a beauty mark under his left eye. The other teenage boy was somewhat taller than he was, and wore the school uniform with stylish black gloves. Izuku's observations only made him more confused. He couldn't place who the boy was, but he seemed oddly familiar. Izuku fumbled around for a notepad or something to write with when his wishes were answered as the other teenager in front of him handed him his notebook and a pen. He couldn't help but grin at the other and gave a slight nod that he hoped came across as the thank you he was trying to convey. I'm sorry, I can't really communicate unless I have one of these, and I'm sorry to ask this, but do I know you? I feel like I might have seen you earlier, but I'm not sure. The spiky-haired boy smiled lightly and nodded. I'm 𝐓𝐬𝐬𝐿 𝐸𝐴𝐻𝐻. I was on the opposing side during the basic training. While he was halfway through his sentence, Izuku had written more. No way, 𝐓𝐬𝐬𝐿 had a beak and resembled a raven, and had this really cool quirk where his shadow could do anything from defend him to attack someone. You don't look anything like him. The other set his red eyes sullenly to the side, moving further into the curtain. I'm afraid of Dark Shadow right now. He can hurt people, and that's the opposite of what a hero should do. If you're talking about me, it's not your fault. Izuku grabbed 𝗵𝐽𝐻's hand to pull him closer to the bed with his right arm. I doubt 𝐾𝐿 told you about what happened to me when we were kids. He probably just said I was afraid of the dark. I don't think even 𝐾𝐿 knew how bad this could have affected me. He probably just wanted to scare me and win, right? He didn't know I would have a panic attack. 𝗵𝐽𝐻 nodded. That doesn't make it right. When a quirk is used in that way, it makes a person no better than a villain. We were supposed to be heroes. And I was supposed to be playing a villain. If I had found some way to cause 𝐾𝐿 to blow up next to you and hurt Dark Shadow, would you hate me for it? 𝗵𝐽𝐻 shook his head slowly. But that would have been different. It's not like I would have a reason to fear the sun or explosions. Dark Shadow will still be there. He just won't be as strong as usual. He could still protect me and help me. Izuku rubbed at his hair in frustration. Let me put it this way then. These scars on my arm, that was me. My fear of the dark, because it's one of my last senses working. That's also me. My panic over other people realizing I'm deaf. That's still me. It's my burden to overcome, and it's something I can make strong. The green-haired boy smiled as much as he could. When you get hurt, when something scary happens, when you can't move, it doesn't matter. Because a hero will still smile through it all to save the people around them, even if they feel like it's pointless. That's the type of hero I want to be. And now I know that shadows and darkness are my weakness, and there's something I will have to make a strength. I hope you will help me do that one day. Izuku winced from writing so much, as 𝗵𝐽𝐻 stared at the last message. You're not a bad person. I can kind of remember someone rocking me back and forth now, and I think it was you. So I guess that makes you my hero. Whether it was from finding out Izuku was deaf, and what his actions had done, or the kind words of Izuku to him, he couldn't tell. 𝗵𝐽𝐻 just knew he had to hug the other teen in front of him as tears formed in the corners of his eyes. He cried into the Izuku's shoulder. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The green-haired boy rubbed 𝗵𝐽𝐻's back in comfort until they both drifted off to sleep. Izuku woke up surrounded by his mom, Recovery Girl, All Might, 𝐾𝐿 and Mrs. Bakugo, Aizawa-sensei, and 𝗵𝐽𝐻 who was still asleep next to him. He signed at his mother. Is everything okay? 𝐴nko teared up and immediately went to hold one hand with her own and signing with the other. You would ask that, Izuku. She shook her head fondly and nodded her head at the teachers behind her, who parted ways to reveal that there was actually another individual in the room, Principal Nezu. Since the principal wasn't exactly making the easiest lip movements for Izuku to follow, he tapped his mom's hand as a sign to let her know he would need her to translate for him. While the principal spoke, 𝐴nko made signs to her son. Izuku, it seems to me that you have found yourself in a rather precarious situation due to the actions of one of the other students. As such, we are working on disciplinary actions to execute towards the individuals involved, which is why Mrs. Bakugo is present. If that is okay. Izuku quickly nodded his consent and tried to make sure that he didn't wake 𝗵𝐽𝐻. Then I will state what Katsuki must do as an apology to you and your family for what happened. Katsuki will fix the suit that was ruined and made for you before the class tournament begins in a couple of months, and he will also carry anything for you until you are healed. 𝗵𝐽𝐻 can also do the same. He was also asked to inform both your mother and his parents about his escapades today, which he did immediately. Further, Katsuki will teach sign language to the class without letting any of them know of your deafness. Izuku shook his head back and forth and made a huge X with his arms, wincing when he lifted them too fast. He grabbed the notebook that he had used earlier with 𝗵𝐽𝐻 and wrote down a quick message. Please don't punish 𝗵𝐽𝐻 at all. He was following 𝐾𝐿's lead. Also, I don't want you to punish 𝐾𝐿 at all. He took advantage of my weakness, but it's mine to morph and strengthen if I truly want to be the best hero possible. Everyone wore a stone-cold expression as Katsuki walked up to the boy and grabbed the front of his shirt. Are you an idiot? I did something bad. You're not supposed to forgive me, you dumbass. I'm supposed to apologize. Katsuki clenched his teeth in his normal horse manner as Izuku peeked at him with one eye and turned to the side to avoid the other's spit projectiles. 𝗵𝐽𝐻 stirred to his left and slowly opened his eyes to the scene, and not knowing what else to do, Dark Shadow reached out and pushed Katsuki off of Izuku. Katsuki quickly got up and reached for Deku again, being pushed off time and time again, but still having enough time to push and pull Izuku back and forth aggressively. After you got back in the area for the first time since we were kids, I wanted and still want to plummet you into the ground like the pebble you are, Deku. Katsuki stopped pushing and pulling the green-haired boy as much before slowing down and letting his hands drop to his side. "But you aren't a Deku anymore, are you, Deku?" Katsuki started signing into Izuku's hands with tears flowing down his face. "You get straight A's. You got first in the entrance exams. You control your quirk, and you have a creepy handle on strategy. I don't deserve your friendship. I never did." He paused for a second. "Did you enjoy tricking me?" Izuku lifted his head, and with a shocked face, tore his hand away and glowered at Katsuki while grabbing his notebook from his side again. "It wasn't like that, 𝐀𝐦. My quirk wasn't my secret to tell. Also, even after everything you've done, I can't help but see how lonely you are. You need a hero, and so do I. Which is why I will always smile through everything, even this." Katsuki quickly got up and ran out the door, despite everyone's cries of protest, and 𝐓𝐸𝐻 wasn't far behind him. Izuku forced up an arm to halt anyone from moving, and consequently showing off the bloodstains on his bandages. "Please don't punish him. I beg of you. I don't think he wanted this to happen." Principal Nezu motioned to continue the conversation as 𝐀𝐦 shakily signed what he said to her son. "Frankly, it doesn't matter. Yua does not accept that kind of behavior. Young Bakugo must be punished in some form. And although I commend you for keeping your deafness a secret for so long, wouldn't it be better for your classmates to know?" Izuku shook his head frantically, and he signed back furiously, not even bothering with his notebook. "No, I don't want anyone to know, except for those in this room. 𝐓𝐸𝐻 only found out by incident. I don't want it broadcasted that I'm deaf. That always makes things worse." He huffed out his cheeks and grabbed his notebook again, while everyone was still shocked by what he was saying. What if 𝐀𝐦 only teaches battle sign language to the class under the pretense that his explosions can cause sudden ear ringing? It can still be his punishment. Everyone paused as a stare-down occurred between the principal and Izuku. Eventually Nezu relented that Izuku's punishment would suffice, and left in a relatively cheerful manner. Izuku released a breath he didn't even know he had been holding. His mom comfortingly ran her hands along her son's arm and turned her attention to the teachers and her old friend Mitsuki Bakugo. She faced in a way so Izuku couldn't read her lips. "I will never understand why my son is the way he is, but I would never have him any other way. His desire to help people is his center, and I hope that you continue to watch over him. Also, Mitsuki, I'm so sorry that your son feels the way he does. But if this behavior continues, I will take matters into my own hands to protect my son." She paused and contemplated for a moment. After all, he doesn't need friend drama when he will have enough problems facing villains. 𝐀𝐦 calmly turned back to her son to give him the comfort and love he needed, as he drifted off to sleep again. Plus 𝐓𝐸𝐻 eventually caught up with Katsuki, and he tightly gripped the other's shoulder. "Bakugo, you still haven't apologized. Izuku deserves that much. I already made my penance." Rather than actually answer with a reply 𝐓𝐸𝐻 wanted, Katsuki always had to rage onward with a sharp tongue. "If you made your penance, then why are you still beakless, bird boy? Too scared for your shadow to be on your face?" The black-haired teen rolled his striking red eyes. "I happen to like this form more because it feels like I have more control over Dark Shadow. But believe whatever you want to. It doesn't change the fact that you should apologize." Katsuki grit his teeth at the boy. "Would that make you happy or everyone else?" He raised a stark eyebrow. "Me happy? How about Izuku happy? That's all I want." Katsuki kicked at air and glowered. "Well, I won't, and I don't care about making Izuku happy. So shut up about it already." Saying 𝐓𝐸𝐻 was angry was an understatement, because he was pretty sure that shadows were beginning to surround them from Dark Shadow to supplement his emotions. "You will apologize. Then afterward, I want you to teach me sign language. More than what they're asking for in the class." 𝐓𝐸𝐻 went back towards the infirmary, leaving a pissed-off horse behind him. Plus, the black-haired teen came into the clinic to find Izuku already asleep, and the Mr. Aizawa discussing Izuku with 𝐀𝐦. It looked like All Might had left for class again. He coughed to grab their attention. "I already asked Bakugo, but if any of you know sign language, I would humbly wish to learn. I know there is a lot, and that I have little hope to be fluent, but I want to be there for Izuku as much as possible. Especially since I am the only other student that knows his condition other than Bakugo." 𝐀𝐦 smiled broadly with a twinkle in her eye. "I would be happy to teach you." She grabbed his hand and pulled him down into a sitting position next to her. "So first off, we should go through the alphabet a couple of times. You seem like a smart boy, so you should be able to get this rather quickly." She clapped her hands together. I know. The best place to start is always your name. I believe it's fu mai kanji. Yes? He nodded, and she quickly went through 3 signs. The first was of her right pointer finger motioned at the ground, as if she had spotted something. The next was 3 fingers pointed to her left side. The third was like scissors with her thumb up. And the last was her 4 fingers held up with her thumb tucked in. She also quickly moved a scissor-like symbol to her left. 𝐬𝐬 quickly copied her movements from before, and kept doing them until he could do them perfectly and rather fast. How do I do Izuku, and thank you, and sorry? 𝐬𝐬 spelled out her son's name pinky up, pointer and middle finger down with thumb pointed left and a scissor motion to the left, and a simple thumb up and fingers to the left symbol. Oh, and thank you is this. She made a chopping motion onto her left hand with her left hand. 𝐬𝐬 smiled. Also, for a while it would be good to supplement what you do by saying the words, especially since Izuku can read lips. And sorry is this. 𝐬𝐬 rubbed her fist across her chest. 𝐬𝐬 nodded contently and went over everything, even asking her to teach him the rest of the signs for the hiragana, and eventually ending the lesson by thanking the kind mom and moving to the other side of Izuku to keep him company while he slept. She couldn't help the broad grin and blush that spread across her face along with a slight yawn. What a kind soul. Plus, as soon as classes ended officially for the day, 𝐻𝐚𝐭 and 𝐀𝐦 rushed to the infirmary. They had wanted to leave to check on Deku immediately, but 𝐀𝐦 pressed that they shouldn't until class was released for the day. They quickly and quietly opened the door into the clinic and entered the area behind the curtain, Izuku. They both cautioned as they entered to see Izuku staring out the window with 2 people in chairs lying on either side of him asleep. Izuku! They ran to his side until he held up a hand and put his pointer finger to his lips, asking them to be quiet. They nodded, and 𝐻𝐚𝐭 teared up a bit, while they quietly tried to ask Izuku how he was doing. He attentively read their lips and grabbed his notebook lightly from underneath 𝐬𝐬's arm. I'm doing a lot better. The medicine really helped and all of my injuries were mostly self-induced. His words made a shudder go through his friends. It was hard enough watching the attack out of the corner of their eyes when it happened, and they couldn't imagine waking up with the wounds after the one they witnessed. 𝐻𝐚𝐭 stared at them for a bit. Do they still itch? Is there anything we can get you? Are you staying the night? Should we wake them up for you? Izuku made a motion that looked like he was chuckling. They sting a bit, but I need to leave them alone. I could actually use some water. 𝐀𝐦 quickly moved to get some. I do need to spend the night. I want to leave them. Mom was really worried and 𝐬𝐬 was really guilty. They need sleep. 𝐻𝐚𝐭 smiled sweetly. I think you mean you need to sleep. Izuku shrugged lightly with a slight smile. She turned her attention to the raven-haired teenager next to him and glared lightly. I don't know if I can forgive him for what he did to you, Deku. I can't imagine what it must have been like thinking you were blind for forever. He automatically relaxed in relief. It seemed as though no one had found out how deaf he was. It wasn't his fault, 𝐻𝐚𝐭, and either way it's my choice who to forgive or not. Kaken didn't think about how it would affect me, and really it's partially my fault. After all, I'm the one who's afraid of the darkness. 𝐻𝐚𝐭 grabbed his shoulder. It is not your fault. I just wish there was something we could have done to help. There's nothing anyone could have done, but you know I think I'm starting to like the darkness more. She blinked at Izuku and smiled, then nodded. Then I know you will be fine, Deku. Do you want us to bring you anything tomorrow? Food? Clothes? Anything like that? Izuku shook his head and grinned. Maybe my homework and notes for tomorrow, when you guys get the chance. I'm probably going to go back to sleep in a bit though. The meds make me really tired and loopy. 𝐀𝐦 went into a rant about how he would make sure to deliver the notes to him as soon as classes were over along with any homework from the day, as he pushed up his glasses with a glint and grabbed 𝐻𝐚𝐭 waving goodbye and using his quirk to quickly get them to the train station before they were so late their parents worried since it was starting to get dark. Plus, after the others left, Izuku hunkered down into the bed in the dimming sunlight, wincing and trying to find a way back underneath the arms of his mom and 𝐬𝐬 without waking them up, which he failed miserably. Luckily, his mom stayed asleep, but 𝐬𝐬 stirred awake. He groggily rubbed at his eyes, and from his lessons that afternoon subconsciously signed Izuku's name. It was only a few seconds, but it felt like the largest weight had come off Izuku's chest, and he almost found it impossible to write. You learned my name? 𝐬𝐬 nodded and repeated Izuku's name, followed by rubbing his chest. Izuku, sorry. As the light faded from the room, Tears started to fall in large blobs from Izuku's green eyes. His tiny world didn't feel so small anymore. Someone else wanted to communicate with him after learning about his condition, and had gone out of their way to understand him. Izuku rubbed at his eyes, and sobbed, letting all the years of silence and bullying and suicidal slurs flow out of him. 𝐓𝐴𝐬 just clutched onto the boy, and let him cry as he hugged him as Izuku had done for him earlier. Eventually, Izuku reached for 𝐓𝐴𝐬's hand, and spelled characters into his palm. "I don't think I'm as afraid of the dark anymore. Thank you, 𝐓𝐴𝐬." After another night of surveillance, Izuku was free to go with specific instructions on how to properly bandage his arms, and his new nutrition and training plan for the next couple of weeks. Apparently, since he had started at UA, he had dropped too much weight on top of everything else, almost 10 pounds. His best guess was that it was nerves, but the others had different ideas. Recovery Girl and All Might were fuming, since it seemed like he was overworking himself, even more so in comparison to the summer-long session he had been doing, and his mom was fretting over whether she had been feeding him enough. As soon as he left the infirmary, his whole class was waiting for him, sans a couple of people. Lessons had begun on sign language due to the ear-ringing Bakugu's quirk can cause. The school didn't want other heroes to be inconvenienced if communication became impractical, or at least that was the excuse they had gone with. And of course, after the first lesson ended that day, everyone decided to come over and visit Izuku, only to see him standing in the hall reading something. He was lucky some of their steps caused vibrations on the floor, and on impulse he turned in the directions they were coming from with a smile and waved. Everyone was running towards him, yelling his name, from what he could from their lips, with excitement that made his heart burn. "I'm so lucky." Izuku happily took out his notebook to talk with someone. "How did the lesson go? Where are Tokoyami, Yaoyorozu, Kirishima, and Bakugo?" Ochako was the first one to answer him with a wry smile, which he was thankful for. Her lips were the easiest along with Ida's to read. "I believe they're speaking to Bakugo for you. Also, it's okay to refer to them by their nicknames in front of us, Deku. I'm sure they won't mind." If Izuku's eyes could have gotten any wider, they would have been the size of frisbees. Not from the second part of what Ochako had said, but the first. Why are they speaking to 𝐀𝐭𝐦 after sign language class? Did he do something wrong? Everyone loves 𝐀𝐭𝐦 though. He doesn't typically get in trouble. He's a great friend, or at least he kept the other bullies off of me without realizing it. I can't even be that upset about what happened. In the end, I was almost doing the same thing by using myself as bait to lure him in. I used his anger to my advantage. He used the darkness to his. Mumbling sounds exited Midoriya's mouth without him even noticing it. Why are they speaking to him for me? Okacho turned her head to the side in a way that flipped her hair to one side, as if to silently ask what he meant. Well, to make sure he doesn't do something like this again, silly. A noise tore through him that surprised everyone to the point that they didn't believe it was actually him, followed closely by a guttural and raspy exclamation. "What?" Ida and Ochako blinked slowly, trying to grasp the situation. Even though they were probably the closest to the green-haired boy other than Bakugo, it was the first time they had really heard him speak other than incoherent mumbling to himself. The shock took so long to get over that Ochako, who was the first to snap out of it, barely managed to grab Deku's arm before he ran off into the long hall from where they came. Ochako was the first to snap out of it, and quickly held onto his arm. "No, Deku." Izuku tried to shove her off lightly, as though she were a feather. He couldn't stand the thought of 𝐀𝐭𝐦 getting yelled at over him again. The action just made her hold on to him tighter. "No, Deku." At that point, he physically grabbed her hands and took them off his arm, to write in his notebook again. He's already had enough of Ochako. The classes were bad enough. He just did what any hero or villain would do. He used the situation to his advantage. I failed. If they continue to blast him, he'll just blast back harder until a fight breaks out. None of them deserve that. Ochako just went ahead and placed her hands on both his shoulders, so he was forced to look at her. "That's why Momo is there, Deku. Let them help you. Let us help you." Tears slowly, but surely, started to pool in Izuku's eyes, running down his face in heavy globs. "I'm thankful, but he's really trying his best. 𝐀𝐭𝐦 has never once apologized to me genuinely for anything, and I never wanted him to. Trust me when I say that this isn't the worst thing I've forgiven him for. 𝐀𝐭𝐦 is 𝐀𝐭𝐦." plus 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 plus. When Bakugo got pulled aside by an anxious-looking Momo and a furious-looking Tokoyami after teaching the extras some common signs that could save their lives, Shitty Hair decided to stay behind. He wouldn't say he was grateful, but it was nice finding out that despite the way he acts, someone decided to stand by him like Deku had all the freaking years, but didn't look down on him the way he feels every time he's near the stupid nerd. It was kind of nice in a way. What the hell do you want extra lessons? Tokoyami glared at Bakugo. Apologized to Midoriya. No. Yes. No. Bakugo started secreting a bit of sweat and clenching his hands and cracking his knuckles. Yes. Bakugo blasted off towards the freaking dark bird boy, grabbing his face in the palm of his hand. When are you going to let this go? The nerd doesn't want my apology. He never did, and I don't want to give it either. Next thing he knew, he was surrounded in an endless pit of darkness plus 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 plus. Izuku quickly ran down the hall searching for his childhood friend and other classmates, and after turning a few corners, he finally ran into what could only be described as a disaster. The sweet smell of something akin to nitroglycerin hung heavy in the air, along with a certain amount of leftover heat. Scorch marks decorated the once pristine walls. 𝐀𝐦 man, why do you make things so difficult sometimes? Izuku continued a little further down the hall to find some dark inkai mass overtaking the walkway. Kirishima looked worried standing off to the side along with Momo seeming just a little stressed out. Izuku went up and nudged their shoulders to get their attention, which made both of them freak out and shoot into the air. Both of them quickly started talking, and trying to read their lips made his head hurt. He signed smoothly. Stop. Slow down. Both had the decency to look sheepish. Kirishima chuckled a bit and inadvertently rubbed the back of his head. Our bad dude, sorry about that. Tokoyami and Baku bro are fighting, and it's been a while. Izuku raised his eyebrow and quickly wrote a few things in his notebook. Why? Are they fighting over me? I thought you guys were just going to talk. They could get expelled for using their quirks like this. Momo shifted her eyes. We know. But Bakugo got so angry and so Tokoyami felt it would be smarter to take the lead since he could be the perfect defense. Okay, give me a few minutes. Izuku went up to the mass and knocked on the outside. Surprisingly, it opened and spat out Bakugo and Tokoyami. It was almost funny how silly both of them looked, other than the fact that both were clearly pissed with each other. Chaos consumed the area as suddenly everyone started yelling at each other again. Izuku clutched his head and groaned internally. This will be a long afternoon. He quickly stepped in between everyone and held up his hands, signing stop again. Everyone promptly clammed up, except for of course Bakugo, who was saying something about not shutting up for a useless piece of trash. Needless to say, Deku was not in the mood and turned to him, signing. I know that you take great joy in being a jerk, but I need you to calm down for 5 seconds of your life. I don't need your apology. I never needed it. Bakugo seemed pretty shocked and seemed about to interrupt, but Izuku continued before he had a chance. We've been friends since we were kids. Our parents were literally best friends from high school. After everything you ever did to me, apologizing now would be pointless since I can't hold much against you. Bakugo looked like he was 5 seconds from running away, which was an odd change. I know you didn't mean for me to lose my hearing. We were playing hide and seek. I'm not upset about what happened a few days ago, because you were just trying to win. I would have been angrier if you had taken it easy on me, since that seems to be what everyone feels the need to do. I know you better than most people, Kaken. Of course, that just pissed Bakugo off more. Again. But Deku glared at him and continued signing despite the other clearly grinding his teeth. However, you need to change your attitude. I know for your quirk, since the nitroglycerin-like compound slows down your heart rate, you need to be constantly angry to increase your beats per minute. But you do not have to be angry at other people, and that includes me. Bakugo aggressively signed back. Are you done? Izuku nodded determinedly, spun on his heel and walked away, before someone grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. It was Bakugo looking more incensed than earlier, and he continued signing, beautifully and fluidly if Deku was being honest. It's my turn now, asshat. I don't know how you found out my anger management problems have to do with my quirk. But that's freaking weird, you nerd. That made Izuku chuckle a bit. I used my brain, 𝐀𝐦. I didn't want to make excuses for your bullying. But you clearly didn't fully hate me since you kept the other bullies off my back. Bakugo turned slightly pink. Whatever, nerd. I hate your guts. And stop calling me freaking 𝐀𝐦 just cause it's easier to sign. And I don't think you should consider me your friend given everything that's happened. Anyway, tell Bird Boy to chill his feathers. Izuku tilted his head slightly. But you are my friend. Even if you don't think so. You just messed up, 𝐀𝐦. We all make mistakes. Deal with it. Shut the hell up, you freaking Deku. Deku smiled and waved goodbye before stopping at the other 3 people that just saw his exchange before grabbing his notebook and writing down some things again for them. Look, I really appreciate everything you all were trying to do and are trying to do. But this is my problem. This is my fight. And I want you all to respect what I want to do about it. I'm not angry with him. He messed up. But he was trying to win and use his knowledge to his advantage. There were things he should have done differently. But there is nothing he did that is unforgivable. If anything, he should apologize to Tokoyami. He walked off, leaving a bunch of shocked people behind. Plus 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 plus. Bakugo groaned and facepalmed after putting up with the freaking broccoli head. Then whipped around and saw the stupid freaking beak of darkness staring at him. Okay, bird brain, here's the deal. Bakugo growled. I should have told you about the history and information I had on the situation. I didn't think the nerd would have reacted so badly. I figured he would be a bit caught off guard, and we could use that to our advantage and win. Even with what happened, some sick part of me is happy I won. Because that's what I do. I win. I will always win. Because if you aren't winning, then you're losing. As a hero, that means a villain continuing to ruin society. A civilian losing their life. But withholding intel can get a coworker killed or injured. I'm sorry, I should have let you know everything I knew about Deku. But I was and still am pissed with him. Tokoyami shifted his eyes to the side with a large emo sigh. If he doesn't want your apology, I guess I should leave it. But I will never forget the look on his face after what happened. That was our fault, Bakugo. We're heroes. Our quirks are meant for good things, no matter how scary they are. Bakugo let off little explosions in his hands and sneered back. Then stop fearing your quirk and turn back into the bird beak. I know you are. Dark shadow is part of you, or whatever. He stuck his hands in his pockets and walked away with a grim look on his face. He understood better than anyone hating your own quirk and being compared to a villain for any reason. Plus 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 plus. Izuku peeked into his house and noticed his mom sewing something on the couch. Hey mom, sorry I worried you. She didn't respond. But he understood she was concentrating so hard on whatever she was doing, and it looked like she might have had some earbuds on a podcast or music while she worked. He grinned and made his way to the kitchen to grab a snack after a long day. In the fridge and pantry were all of his favorites, and he totally didn't tear up just a bit from how much his mom cared. She always keeps it stocked for me with anything I could ever want. He decided that the day was definitely a Pocky kind of day, and he had some almond and milk chocolate ones just sitting there. Izuku hummed happily when he stuck it in his mouth and quickly grabbed some of his work materials since he was a bit behind in class after the incident. When he got to his desk in his room, he found a large amount of gauze wraps and blinked when he noticed a note with some dark purple lettering. Sorry for not respecting your wishes. Hope these help, Tokoyami. He went to bed with a smile.